Officer, look at me. I'm 62 years old. I'm wearing a suit. I'm drinking coffee.
I don't care who you are! On the ground! Now!
You are making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your life.
Hands where I can see them. Do not test me.
I'm not testing you, officer. I'm documenting you.
The command tore through the serenity of a perfect Tuesday morning like a jagged stone through a stained glass window. Marcus Thorne froze his grip, tightening instinctively on the handles of the 2 brown paper grocery bags he was carrying. He did not drop them. He did not flinch. He simply stopped moving his feet, planted shoulder-width apart on the sidewalk, and slowly turned his head toward the source of the shouting. "I said drop the bags. Do it now, or I will put you on the ground." Officer Kyle Vance was 28 years old, standing behind the open door of his patrol cruiser, his hand resting ominously on the grip of his holstered service weapon. His posture was coiled aggressive, a picture of adrenaline looking for a release. The cruiser was parked at a sharp angle against the curb of Maple Avenue, its lights flashing silently, reflecting off the manicured hedges and the pristine white siding of the colonial-style homes that lined the street. It was 10:15 a.m. 15. The sky was a piercing, cloudless blue. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and the faint, sweet scent of blooming dogwood trees. It was the kind of morning that real estate agents put on brochures to sell the American dream. Marcus Thorne took a slow, deliberate breath. At 54 years old, Marcus was a man who occupied space with the density of granite. He stood 6'2", with broad shoulders that had carried the weight of command for decades. He was dressed in a clean-pressed navy blue polo shirt tucked into khaki cargo pants and sturdy walking boots. He looked exactly like what he was, a man of discipline taking a morning walk. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that carried without shouting. "I am holding eggs and milk. If I drop them, they will break. I am going to slowly lower them to the ground. Is that understood?" "Don't tell me what to do," Vance barked, stepping out from behind the door, closing the distance between them. "You fit the description of a suspicious person reported in this neighborhood. Loitering, looking into windows. Put the bags down now." "Suspicious?" Marcus repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. He moved with agonizing slowness, bending at the knees, not the waist, keeping his eyes locked on the officer. He set the bags down on the concrete. "I live 2 blocks away on Elm Street. I just walked to the market. I am walking home." "I don't believe you," Vance snapped. He was 10 feet away now, his eyes darting frantically over Marcus's form, looking for a threat that wasn't there. "We've had reports of burglaries. You don't look like you belong here. You look like you're casing the place. Turn around, hands on your head." Marcus stood to his full height again. He did not turn around. "Officer, my wallet is in my back right pocket. It contains my driver's license with my address, which is 412 Elm Street. It also contains my retired military identification. I am not turning around. I am not a criminal. I am a homeowner standing on a public sidewalk." "I don't care what you say, you are—" Vance's face was flushing a blotchy red. The calmness of the older man was not de-escalating the situation for him. It was infuriating him. In Vance's mind, compliance looked like fear. It looked like trembling. It looked like begging. Marcus Thorne was doing none of those things. He was looking at Vance with the disappointed analytical gaze of a man who had trained boys better than this to be men. "You are refusing a lawful order. This is your last warning." "It is not a lawful order," Marcus said, his voice steady, devoid of the panic Vance wanted to see. "You have no probable cause. You have no reasonable suspicion of a crime. You have a vague report and a black man walking with groceries. You are making a mistake, son. A very expensive mistake." Vance pulled his baton from his belt. The metallic snick of the telescoping steel extending echoed loudly in the quiet street. "Don't call me son. Turn around now." To understand the catastrophe that was unfolding on Maple Avenue, one must understand the 2 men standing on that sidewalk, separated by 10 feet of concrete and an ocean of experience. Officer Kyle Vance had been with the department for 6 years. He was the product of a system that often prioritized aggression over assessment. In his short career, he had accumulated 9 formal complaints. 4 were for excessive use of force. 3 were for discourtesy and abusive language. 2 were specifically regarding racial profiling. In a functioning system, Kyle Vance would have been retrained or removed long ago, but the union was strong. His father was a former sergeant, and the files had been closed with findings of unfounded or exonerated. Vance believed himself to be a warrior. He viewed the affluent suburbs not as a community to serve, but as a perimeter to defend. He saw threats in shadows and disrespect in silence. He was 28, angry and armed with the authority of the state, but he possessed the emotional maturity of a teenager. Standing opposite him was Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne, United States Navy retired. Marcus had served his country for 26 years. He had spent the first half of his career on attack submarines, living in a steel tube hundreds of feet beneath the surface of the ocean, where panic was a death sentence and discipline was the oxygen they breathed. He had spent the second half in naval intelligence and high-level logistics. He held a top-secret/SCI security clearance. He had managed budgets larger than the entire police department's annual funding. He had led hundreds of sailors, shaping them into cohesive units capable of operating under extreme pressure. Marcus had retired 3 years ago. He had purchased his home on Elm Street with the savings from a lifetime of service and a lucrative post-retirement consulting contract with the Department of Defense. He was a deacon at his church. He was a widower who kept his lawn immaculate. When Marcus looked at Officer Vance, he didn't see a terrifying figure of authority. He saw a breakdown in the chain of command. He saw a junior sailor who had not studied the mission brief. He saw a liability. "I am asking you to de-escalate," Marcus said, watching the baton in Vance's hand. He kept his own hands visible, palms open near his chest. "Call your supervisor. Verify my address. Do not do this." "You're resisting," Vance yelled, convincing himself of the lie even as he spoke it. He was operating on a script that had worked for him before. Intimidate, dominate, control. If they talk back, they are resisting. If they stand tall, they are threatening. "I'm not calling anyone until you are in cuffs." "I am not resisting," Marcus corrected him, his tone shifting into the command voice he had used on the quarterdeck. "I am informing you of your error. I have served this country for 26 years. I have fought for the rights you are currently violating. I suggest you put that weapon away and check my ID." Vance stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. The officer was sweating his eyes wide. He felt small in the presence of the older man's composure, and that feeling was intolerable. He needed to break that composure. He needed to see fear. "I don't care if you're the President of the United States," Vance spat, echoing the arrogance of every tyrant who had ever hidden behind a badge. "You're a suspect in a burglary investigation, and right now you're going to jail." "For what?" Marcus asked. "Buying milk." "For disorderly conduct and failure to obey," Vance declared, reciting the catch-all charges used by weak officers to punish contempt. "Last chance." Marcus looked at the young man, really looked at him. He saw the tremble in Vance's hand, the erratic breathing. He realized that logic would not save him today. This officer was too far down the path of his own bias to turn back without losing face, and for men like Vance, losing face was worse than breaking the law. "I am not disorderly," Marcus said, lowering his voice so that Vance had to strain to hear it. "And I will not submit to an unlawful arrest, but I will not fight you. If you put your hands on me, you are ending your career." Vance didn't hear the warning. He only heard the challenge. The escalation was sudden and violent. Vance lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's left wrist. He didn't just guide the arm behind Marcus's back. He twisted it with a torque designed to inflict pain, a technique meant to force a suspect off balance. Marcus grimaced but did not pull away. He had been trained in hand-to-hand combat. He could have disarmed Vance in 3 seconds. He could have broken the officer's wrist and put him on the pavement before Vance realized what had happened. But Marcus knew the rules of this game. If he fought back, he would be shot. If he fought back, the headline would be "Violent Suspect Attacks Officer." To win this war, he had to lose this battle. "Stop resisting!" Vance screamed for the benefit of the imaginary jury kicking Marcus's legs apart. "I am not resisting," Marcus stated loudly. "I am complying." Vance shoved Marcus forward, slamming him against the hood of the patrol car. The heat of the engine radiated through the metal against Marcus's thighs. With his free hand, Vance reached for his handcuffs. Then, with a petty, vindictive shove of his boot, Vance kicked the grocery bags. The brown paper tore. The carton of milk exploded on impact, with the curb sending a white spray across the manicured grass and splashing onto Marcus's boots. The carton of eggs crushed yolks, bleeding into the concrete. It was a senseless act of destruction, a symbolic violation of domestic peace. "Hey, what are you doing?" The voice came from the house directly across the street. Mrs. Higgins, a 70-year-old retired librarian, was standing on her porch. She was holding her watering can, staring in horror. Next to her, Mr. Henderson, a retired insurance adjuster, was already holding up his smartphone. "Officer," Mr. Henderson shouted, his voice shaking but clear. "I'm recording this. That man is a neighbor. He lives on Elm." "Back off!" Vance shouted over his shoulder, struggling to ratchet the handcuffs onto Marcus's thick wrists. "Stay back or you're next for obstruction." "He isn't doing anything," Mrs. Higgins cried out. "He's just standing there." Vance ignored them. He cinched the handcuffs tight, too tight. The metal bit into the soft tissue of Marcus's wrists, cutting off circulation. He yanked Marcus's arms upward, forcing his head down. "You're hurting him." Another voice joined the chorus. A jogger had stopped. A landscaping crew 2 houses down had turned off their leaf blowers. The audience was growing. Marcus, his face pressed near the hot metal of the car hood, turned his head to the side. He saw Mr. Henderson's phone pointed directly at him. He knew what he had to do. "My name is Marcus Thorne." He projected, his voice booming and clear, ensuring the microphone picked up every syllable. "I am a retired Master Chief Petty Officer of the United States Navy. I live at 412 Elm Street. I am being arrested for walking home with my groceries. I have offered my ID. This officer has refused to look at it." "Shut up." Vance shoved Marcus's head down. "You have the right to remain silent." "I have the right to speak." Marcus countered, his dignity unassailable even in chains. "I am complying with your physical commands. I am documenting this event for the record. Officer, check my back pocket. My ID is there." Vance didn't check. He was too deep in the adrenaline tunnel. He hauled Marcus upright, spinning him around. The older man stood tall despite his hands being bound behind him. The milk dripped from his boots. The neighbors were shouting now, a chorus of "Shame on you!" and "Let him go!" Vance opened the back door of the cruiser. He placed his hand on top of Marcus's head, not to protect him, but to shove him down. "Get in." Marcus paused for 1 second, looking Vance in the eye. "You have just made the worst decision of your life, young man." Vance slammed the door. The interior of the patrol car was a cage of hard plastic and stale air. A plexiglass partition separated Marcus from Officer Vance, creating a physical and auditory barrier, but it could not filter out the tension that filled the vehicle. As Vance pulled away from the curb, leaving the spilled milk and broken eggs to dry in the sun, he felt a surge of euphoric power. In his mind, he had won. He had dominated the threat. He began to construct the narrative in his head, the words he would type into the incident report to justify his actions. Suspect was belligerent. Suspect assumed a fighting stance. Suspect refused to identify. Suspect lunged. He repeated the words like a mantra. He lunged. I feared for my safety. It was the magic phrase that police unions had taught him was a shield against accountability. He glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see a broken man. Instead, he saw Marcus Thorne sitting upright, staring out the window with a terrifying calmness. Marcus was not sulking. He was working. In the back seat, Marcus's mind was operating with the precision of a targeting computer. He was ignoring the pain in his wrists, pushing it to the back of his consciousness, just as he had done during long watches on the bridge in freezing weather. He was cataloging every detail. Time of arrest, 10:22 a.m. Location, 400 block of Maple. Officer name tag, Vance. Badge number 592. Vehicle number 204. Failure to read full Miranda warning immediately upon arrest. Excessive force applied to wrists. Destruction of personal property without cause. Refusal to verify identification. Marcus watched the familiar streets of his neighborhood pass by. He saw the library where he volunteered on weekends. He saw the high school where he had given a speech on Veterans Day. The irony was bitter. He had spent decades defending the abstract concept of freedom, protecting the shipping lanes of the world, ensuring that the American way of life could exist. And here he was, stripped of his freedom by a man who likely couldn't find the Persian Gulf on a map. But Marcus also felt a deep, simmering sorrow. He thought of his late wife, Eleanor. She would have been terrified. He thought of his son, currently serving overseas. What if this had been his son? A younger man might have flinched. A younger man might have pulled his hand away when Vance grabbed him. If Marcus had been 20 years younger, would he be bleeding out on the pavement right now? "You know," Vance said from the front seat, his voice sounding tinny through the partition. "If you had just listened, none of this would have happened. You people always have to make it a show." "You people." Marcus turned his gaze from the window to the back of Vance's head. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew that silence was the loudest thing in the world to a man with a guilty conscience. Vance waited for a response, and when none came, he turned up the radio, trying to drown out the quiet judgment radiating from the back seat. The drive took 12 minutes. It was a transition from the light of the day to the dark machinery of the system. They passed the courthouse, the bail bondsman offices, the gray concrete of the municipal complex. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He visualized his ID card in his wallet. He visualized the phone call he would make. He visualized the look on this officer's face when the truth came out. He found his center. He was a master chief. He had weathered typhoons in the Pacific. He would weather Officer Kyle Vance. The car slowed. They turned into the sally port of the precinct. The heavy metal gate rattled shut behind them, blocking out the sun. The sally port smelled of exhaust fumes and industrial cleaner. Vance hauled Marcus out of the car, gripping his arm with unnecessary force, parading his prize toward the booking entrance. They walked through the heavy steel doors and into the intake area. It was a fluorescent-lit room with linoleum floors scuffed by thousands of reluctant feet. At the high intake desk sat Desk Sergeant Miller. Sergeant Frank Miller was 58 years old, a black man with graying hair close cropped to his scalp and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He had been a Marine before he was a cop. He had seen everything the city had to throw at him, and he had little patience for rookies who brought in nonsense. Miller looked up from his computer as Vance entered, pushing Marcus forward. Miller's eyes didn't go to Vance. They went immediately to Marcus. He saw the posture, the way Marcus stood with his feet aligned, his back straight despite the handcuffs. He saw the quiet intensity in the eyes. He saw the United States Navy anchor tattoo faded but visible on Marcus's right forearm. "What do we have here, Vance?" Miller asked, his voice gravelly and skeptical. "Disorderly conduct. Failure to obey resisting," Vance rattled off, breathless. "Suspect was loitering in the North District. Refused to ID, caused a scene." Miller looked at Marcus. "That true? You refused to ID. Sergeant." Marcus spoke, his voice calm and respectful of the rank, if not the situation. "I informed this officer 3 times that my identification was in my back right pocket. He refused to retrieve it. He refused to verify my residence. I am a retired Master Chief Petty Officer. I live on Elm Street. Miller's eyebrows shot up. He looked at Vance. You didn't check his ID. He was resisting, Sarge. He was hostile. I had to secure the scene. Vance was defensive, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. He's in cuffs now, Miller said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. So he's secure. Check his pockets, now. Vance hesitated, then huffed, moving behind Marcus. He dug into the back pocket of the cargo pants and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He tossed it onto the high desk. Miller picked it up. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the driver's license. Marcus Thorne, 412 Elm Street, a pricey address. Then Miller flipped the flap. There it was. The blue retired military ID card. United States Navy, grade E9, and behind that a white badge with a hologram, a Department of Defense contractor badge marked with a specific color stripe that indicated high-level security clearance. Miller stared at the cards. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He looked up at Marcus, then at Vance. Vance, Miller said softly, do you know what an E9 is? What? Vance blinked. No. What does that matter? It means, Miller said, standing up slowly behind the desk, that this man was a Master Chief Petty Officer. It means he gave orders to officers who outranked you by 10 grades. It means he has a security clearance higher than the Chief of Police. Miller looked at the driver's license again. And he lives on Elm Street. That's 2 blocks from where you picked him up. You arrested a homeowner for walking in his own neighborhood. He lunged at me. Vance stammered the lie, sounding weaker now. He was aggressive. Sergeant, Marcus said, breaking his silence. I would like you to secure the body camera footage from Officer Vance immediately. It will prove that I never moved from my position until he laid hands on me. It will also prove he destroyed my groceries. Miller looked at the groceries on Vance's boots. The dried milk. Uncuff him, Miller ordered. But Sarge, the paperwork. I said uncuff him. Miller roared the Marine coming out. The sound bounced off the cinder block walls, making Vance jump. Right now. The shout summoned Captain Reynolds from his office down the hall. Reynolds was a tall, lean man in his 50s with a receding hairline and a reputation for being a politician. But he knew a disaster when he heard one. What is going on out here? Reynolds demanded, stepping into the booking area. Officer Vance has arrested Master Chief Thorne, Miller said, emphasizing the title, handing the wallet to the captain. For walking home. Vance claims he lunged. The chief claims he was standing still. Reynolds looked at the ID. He looked at Marcus, who was now rubbing his wrists where deep red welts had formed from the over-tightened steel. Reynolds recognized the name. Thorne. He had seen it on the donor list for the Police Athletic League. He had seen it on the community watch board. Master Chief, Reynolds said, his face paling. I believe we met at the Memorial Day parade last year. We did, Marcus said, his voice icy. I was the keynote speaker. The silence in the room was absolute. Reynolds turned slowly to Officer Vance. The captain's eyes were not angry. They were something worse. They were disappointed and terrified of the lawsuit that had just walked through his door. Vance, Reynolds said quietly, did you verify his residence before you put hands on him? He wouldn't turn around, Captain. He was being difficult. Did you verify? No, sir. Did he lunge at you? He made a move, a sudden movement. Sergeant Miller, Reynolds barked. Pull the footage. Now. We are going to watch it right here. Miller was already typing. He pulled the feed from Vance's camera, which uploaded automatically when the car entered the station Wi-Fi. He turned the monitor so the captain could see. They watched in silence. They saw the sunny street, They heard the aggressive shouting of Officer Vance. They saw Marcus standing still calm explaining about the eggs. They saw Vance kick the bags. They saw Vance twist the arm of a man who was not moving. There was no lunge. There was no resistance. There was only a bully with a badge assaulting a citizen. "That's enough," Reynolds said. He didn't look at Vance. He couldn't. "Vance, give me your badge." "Captain." Vance's voice trembled. "Gun and badge, on the desk. Now." "Sir, I was following protocol." "You were profiling, and you lied to a superior officer," Reynolds snapped. "You're on administrative leave, effective immediately pending an internal investigation. Get out of my station." Vance's hands shook as he unholstered his weapon and unpinned his shield. He placed them on the counter. He looked at Marcus, expecting to see gloating. He saw nothing. Marcus was looking through him as if he were a ghost, as if he didn't exist. "Get out," Reynolds repeated. Vance turned and walked out the door, stripped of his power, leaving the heavy silence of his errors behind him. Reynolds turned to Marcus. "Master Chief, I cannot express how sorry I am. We will drop all charges immediately. I will drive you home myself." "I don't want a ride, Captain," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I want my phone. I need to call my lawyer, and then I want the name of the neighbors who were recording." By 2:00 p.m., the video from Mr. Henderson's phone was on every local news channel. By 5:00 p.m., it was national. The title on social media was simple, "Hero Veteran Arrested for Walking While Black." The image of the milk exploding of the older man standing with dignity while being berated by a frantic younger officer struck a nerve across the country. It wasn't just the racism, it was the disrespect. The visual of a man who had served his country being treated like an enemy combatant in his own front yard was undeniable. Marcus hired Anthony Sterling, a civil rights attorney known for tearing apart municipal defenses like wet tissue paper. Sterling didn't just file a complaint. He launched a crusade. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. It alleged unlawful seizure, false arrest, excessive use of force, racial profiling, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the centerpiece of the lawsuit was the pattern and practice of the department, highlighting Vance's 9 previous complaints. "They knew," Marcus said in a press conference held on his front lawn, his arm in a brace from the sprain caused by the handcuffs. "They knew he was dangerous. They knew he targeted people who looked like me, and they sent him into my neighborhood anyway. The city attorney wanted to fight it. They wanted to drag it out to claim qualified immunity. But the optics were impossible. The Department of Defense had made an inquiry. The Navy Times ran a feature story on Marcus's service record. The discovery phase was brutal for the city. Sterling subpoenaed Vance's text messages, which revealed a treasure trove of derogatory language and jokes about cleaning up the streets. It destroyed any defense of good faith error. 6 months later, the city came to the table. They offered $200,000. Sterling laughed. They offered $500,000. Marcus shook his head. "It's not about the money," Marcus told the mediators. "It's about the cost. If it's cheap, you'll do it again. It has to hurt." The final settlement was agreed upon on a rainy Thursday, $980,000. But Marcus demanded more than the check. He demanded a clause in the settlement that required the department to overhaul its pedestrian stop policy, requiring a supervisor's presence before an arrest for disorderly conduct could be made when no violent crime was observed. He also demanded a public apology, not a written statement. A press conference where the chief of police had to say the words, and he got it. Officer Kyle Vance was not just fired, he was decertified. His name was entered into the national database, ensuring he could never wear a badge in another state. The warrior who wanted to protect the suburbs from the others was now unemployed, facing a civil suit of his own, and living in his parents' basement, forever known as the man who arrested a master chief for buying milk. A year after the incident, on a Tuesday morning, just as bright and beautiful as the one that had changed everything, Marcus Thorne stepped out of his front door. He walked down the steps past the immaculate lawn. He turned onto the sidewalk. He walked the 2 blocks to the market. He bought a carton of milk and a dozen eggs. The walk back was quiet. The neighbors waved. Mrs. Higgins called out a hello from her garden. The patrol car that passed him slowed down not to harass him, but because the officer inside gave a respectful nod, a new officer trained under the new protocols. Marcus reached the spot on Maple Avenue where the milk had spilled. The stain was long gone, washed away by rain and time. But Marcus stopped there. He set the bags down. He took a breath. The money had secured his grandchildren's college funds. The policy changes had likely saved someone else from a similar fate. But the scar remained. The knowledge that his service, his rank, his clearance, and his conduct were almost not enough. That without a video and a badge in his wallet, he would have just been another statistic. Marcus picked up the bags. They were heavy, but he was strong. True patriotism, he realized, wasn't just fighting enemies abroad. It was fighting for the promise of the country at home. It was demanding that the nation live up to the words he had sworn to defend. It was the hardest duty he had ever pulled, but he would stand the watch. He walked the rest of the way home a free man, but a vigilant one. The end. Reflecting on this story, it's heartbreaking to realize that for many, dignity is something that has to be proven rather than assumed. Marcus Thorne had the tools to fight back. But what about those who don't? Do you think police officers should carry personal liability insurance for misconduct lawsuits instead of the taxpayers footing the bill? And how many Kyle Vances do you think are still patrolling your streets today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please subscribe to help us shine a light on these stories.